Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Somebody
no
put
worries.
something in my calendar for me, so you know.
No worries. All right. Well, we'll just go as far as we can, and you just have to let me know. Um, so I'll do a little intro. Welcome to Discover Energy Work. A few days ago, I was reading this book, a fantastic book called, I think it's called Becoming Psychic, and I was really inspired by it, and I really got the feeling that the person narrating really understood the subject, and I thought, well, I wonder if that's actually the author, Jeff Tarrant, and because I feel enthusiasm from it, and I thought I'll reach out to this guy. And who do we have tonight? We have psychic research. I think you can say psychic researcher, author, PhD. Like entrepreneur, but I think you better introduce yourself, Jeff, and thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for the nice introduction and for inviting me on. Yeah, that's a pretty good intro. My background, I'm actually a counseling psychologist by training, but then I got into sort of neuroscience very early in my career, and that's kind of taken over. And so for the last 25 years, that's really been the emphasis of the work that I've been doing, both clinically and then also in terms of, trying to understand what's going on in the brain of people who exhibit, extraordinary abilities.
Right. You know what I find? I mean, I love to, try to get a backstory because number one, I just really like your book. I mean, I think that if anybody's interested in the subject, I think it's a must read. Yeah, and I've got a few books that I think are really must reads, but I think you're definitely there. And I'm not just saying that. Yeah, it's not as they say, the Germans say, honey around the bear's mouth. Um, when did this journey start for you? Because like you could say it's almost career suicide for a lot of people to get involved in anything psychic or paranormal, especially if you're in a science and you've got a degree in psychology, master's PhD in counseling psychology. So like
Mhm.
this is kind of like not the best career move. So what happened?
Yeah, and honestly, this wasn't anything I was looking for. It wasn't anything I was planning for. Um, for better or worse, the way I tend to roll is I just kind of go with what's happening in my world. And so, if certain opportunities present themselves and they're interesting, and I have the space for it, I say yes.
Hmm.
And that's maybe good and bad, right? I can get myself into all kinds of trouble, but it also opens up a lot of opportunities. And
Yeah.
so, really, this journey didn't start for me professionally until about 12 or 13 years ago. And at the time, I was working at the University of Missouri, and a student of mine who had been working with me for about a year introduced me to his mom, who lived a couple of hours away, was a psychic medium, but had this unique ability to channel South American tribal languages, which sounds crazy, when you first hear it, but enough of the story made sense to me and resonated, and there'd been some validation of what she was doing, and so I basically had the opportunity to map her brain, and I sort of jokingly, sort of not, sort of blame her. It's like it's her fault that I'm doing all of this work now, because once I started working with her and saw some very interesting things.
Hmm.
And then she started introducing me to other people that she knew who were mediums and psychics. And, as they say, one thing leads to another. And here I am,
Okay, so I'm kind of like I'm I think I'm been on the wrong track because I thought that some things happened in your childhood. You've had something spooky that's gone on and you've gone like, wait a minute, I know about this. This is not coming out of left field completely. And this is maybe something real. So nothing happened like that before.
well, as a child, I was I was always interested in weird stuff. Whether it was cryptids or UFOs or aliens, I was really big into UFOs and aliens. That was kind of my thing. but telekinesis and psychic, I was so interested in all of that as a kid. And I can't really say that anything happened to me or that I had any big experiences, but it was just something I was always interested in.
Mm.
And then, once I kind of got in school, I really put all of that aside and assumed, because of my psychology training, that it was probably just wishful thinking. It was fantasy. It was, a defense mechanism, maybe, an escape fantasy,
Yeah.
wanting to feel special. And so, I kind of started looking at it all from a very skeptical, critical eye for many years. I thought this was all just garbage. And then, yeah, it was actually my own spiritual exploration that kind of started opening me back up to the possibility of some of these things. And, really some work with meditation and Qigong in particular, where I started feeling energy, whatever that is, and having these experiences of sharing energy with other people and with nature and witnessing some energy healing and being part of some of those things that, made me really start questioning. It's like, well, wait a minute. I think there's more going on here than can be explained just by a strictly material sort of perspective on how the universe works.
Right.
And so I think that's what opened me back up.
Like, I'm curious about that because, so you've had the first thing that came up. You've met this mum of a student who is speaking obscure Amazonian Indian shamanic languages that are like reserved for the shaman. These languages, there's no way that she could possibly have learned them. And it took, was it a couple of years to even find out what the language was? Is that
if my memory serves me, it was 4 years.
right? So she was talking gibberish for 4 years, as far as anybody could tell.
And even as far as she could tell, because she didn't know what she was saying. So she still doesn't. So when she, channels those languages, she didn't know, like, am I just making stuff up? Is this what's going on? She felt like they were a language. They sound like a language, but she didn't know. And it took her 4 years of kind of pestering experts before she finally found somebody that could identify what was going on and then be able to translate some of that.
It's kind of weird though. Like if you're a spirit on the other side and you look for somebody like in the middle of, I don't know, the middle of Arkansas that's going
Missouri.
to channel a language that nobody understands and the person themselves doesn't understand. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a weird one, except unless you take it from the point of view, it's like, well, this is kind of very much evidence that there's an entity, some kind of entity at play. And so from there, is that when you went? So me too. I'm a Tai Chi man. So did you study Tai Chi before that, or?
I started I had worked with Qigong for probably a year or two before I first started into Tai Chi as well. And so those have both been interests of mine for ever since then, so for the last, whatever, 20 years or so. And, I've kind of moved in and out with different teachers and different approaches to that. But yeah, at the time I was living in the middle of Missouri and, this was whatever, 20, 25 years ago, it wasn't like there was a lot of options.
Yeah.
So,
understand. So from that time, you then went to, you had some experiences with like Qigong healing, did you? And
yeah, and that was
yourself.
Yeah, and that was probably my first experience of something that was unusual or abnormal or whatever we want to call it, supernatural.
What happened? So what exactly happened?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it wasn't like there was anything super dramatic. It wasn't like somebody had stage 4 cancer and somehow we cured that. But our little qigong group, it was just part of the way our teacher taught us that this kind of energy healing work was part of how he taught qigong. And so he wasn't just teaching pure qigong. He was teaching qigong with some shamanic practices and some other things that at the time I didn't even know what we were doing. I just assumed it was qigong because I didn't know any better. But he was kind of mixing various things together. And so our little group, it was just a part of what we did was experimented with energy. And, we would have these little energy healing sessions where we would invite somebody in who was having some sort of an issue and, put them on a table and we would all kind of like work with them kind of intuitively. It was interesting because it was a very intuitive approach where, my teacher, his name was Greg, basically encouraged us like, well, find what works for you. Like, forget what the rules are and forget systems. Like, listen to yourself and find what works. And it was interesting because everybody in the group would have different approaches. Some people would be moving their hands over the person and visualizing things. And, and for me, it was very much, it would just kind of like spontaneously happen. Like I would either get an image or some sort of feeling of what this person needed. So maybe it was earth energy or, it might be a rainbow or something, right? That of kind of that type of energy directing toward the person. And what was interesting was pretty much every session, the person on the table would get up and whatever was bothering them, their back hurt or whatever, would be markedly better. And so for me, it was kind of like, okay, this is interesting, right? Because these are people with like chronic health issues, chronic pain that just laying down for 30 minutes isn't going to do the trick, right? I mean, they've tried everything, taken every kind of medication, done every kind of treatment.
Yeah.
And so, for somebody to walk away from that and be like, wow, I feel pretty good. It's like, okay, something's going on here, right? Like something. And, just my own subjective experience of being part of the healing. If you've never done this before, it's interesting because it does something to you as well. I feel like that there's actually, when you do energy healing work, that it doesn't just benefit the person that is receiving the healing. Yeah. It actually benefits the person facilitating that as well. And, so I sort of noticed my own just level of stillness and calmness and, but at the same time, like this energy, right? This kind of, whatever you want to call it, life force or chi, kind of moving through the body and accelerating. And so, again, because I hadn't really had any other experiences before that, this really made an impression of feeling something and going like, oh, okay, there's maybe there is something to
it. See that, like you're actually having a psychic experience, like you're thinking something, you're having an intention. So I mean, really the Chinese area is kind of like what I know more about. So the energy is going to follow your intention. So you have an idea, the energy follows the intention, and then you get a result and you can feel, well, that's what I felt. Like that is exactly what I felt. And there, although it's quite subjective as far as like, from the scientific point of view, I didn't even want to study psychology because I just like was sort of disgusted with science, and I'm so glad I did. Yeah. And I see it totally, totally differently. I see it as a very, very honorable thing to not understand and to say, yeah, I'm going to look at that because I don't understand it. But I mean, I had like just so many experiences like that. But I was in a clinic in Chengdu, and the master people have their eyes closed, and he just like send out his chi, and the people would start moving, and they would start having like a fit. Their whole body would just go into like spontaneous movements, and the movements would last sometimes an hour. They would just move, and then they didn't feel tired afterwards. They felt invigorated after an hour of moving. Yeah, it's bizarre, incredible. And then he would do acupuncture straight through the clothes. So he would feel the chi points and just go straight through. So yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to it. And he called it Tai Chi, and really what he taught was go with the flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then so it's like Wu Wei, which is like a Chinese term, and it's even difficult to translate. It's just it's just weird. Yeah. Okay, that's
Yeah.
cool. And then did you have any, because I'm a little bit skeptical about the physical things. So people like with Tai Chi, they're pushing and they're impressing people. I think some of that I think is suggested. Did you have
Yeah.
these sort of experiences?
No, I've never had any of those experiences. And similarly, I'm pretty skeptical when I see those videos of, these supposed masters, basically just like looking at somebody or stepping aside and people go flying around the room and things like that. It's funny because even though I've seen a lot of interesting things at this point, um, and things that I can't explain and things that I think are real, I still have a fairly skeptical nature. And
Yeah.
so anytime I see something for the first time or, something that just seems like just too far out there, my first reaction is, okay, this is some sort of trickery or suggestion or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and I'm happy to be proved wrong. I would love to be proved wrong. But also, it's like I think it's important to kind of go like, okay, don't be gullible either.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, you've got a science degree. Yeah. I mean, it counts for something. I mean, one of the things I haven't explained, I don't know if heard of this guy called Sam Tam. He might still be alive. I think he is Tai Chi master. And he was standing opposite somebody, and I was standing 90 degrees. And he pushed me 90 degrees. And all I could felt in the moment that he pushed was there was a hole in front of me that I needed to leap back from. I literally felt suddenly there's a hole. And I just went, and I just threw myself back. I mean, it's like a suggestion, but I don't know where it came from because I wasn't thinking it at all. And that was bizarre because that's very psychic. Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I thought. It was something psychic was happening. Amazing.
yeah.
But my teachers in Hong Kong, they all say, focus on the body, biomechanics, just focus on the body. Don't worry about chi too much because you can get mentally ill, if you think about your chi too much, which I think is, good advice. So,
It's interesting because I think that matches one of the lessons that I feel like I keep learning this world of psi abilities, is that if you try too hard, it doesn't work. Like you shut it down, which I think is very much an aspect of qigong and tai chi, right? It's that it's like you want there to be almost no effort in the movement and in what you're doing, and I feel like that actually applies to a lot of what I've seen with psi abilities, like psychokinesis. If you try too hard, it doesn't work. Like it shuts it down.
yeah.
You almost have to have an attitude of being open and interested, but also not caring at the same time. It's almost like a Taoist riddle, right? It's like
Yes, yeah.
care but don't care,
That's
right? And it's
like Wu
okay,
Wei. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, and so and that's tricky, right? And like, especially just my nature, like if I want to accomplish something, well, then I'm going to try hard to get it done. And I'm going to practice, I'm going to do all the things.
mm.
And, that may not necessarily be the right approach, right? It's like, can you relax into it, and sort of allow the process to unfold? That seems to be more effective a lot of times. So it's interesting, right? Because it's almost like a paradox.
Right. So here's the cool thing. Okay, so I've got something to talk to you about this, because you've got a guy, famous guy, Joe McMonagle. Yeah. He was psychic under the most stressful conditions. So he was in Vietnam. Yeah. And he says, along with the Soviets that were doing their psychic research, is look for the soldiers which just know where not to be. Yeah. Because they've got that ability that they're able to access, like very naturally. Now, I think we're all psychic, but we all probably get in our way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the warrior, of course, Tai Chi Chuan, pushing hands. The warrior is essentially, he's kind of a little bit got to go into the whole fight or the whole war, accepting death. Yeah. So this is like, it's like I'm going forward, not to die, but I might well die. Yeah. So I need to live in this moment. But it's exactly that. I can see an analogy to the paradox that you're talking about. Um, and and I've got a famous friend who's a photographer, international photographer for war photographer, and he goes in to war zones wearing no bulletproof jacket, white t-shirt, white shirt, white trousers, like big long sleeve shirt, so everyone can see him. He's not armed, and he just says he's just been lucky. He just knows where to go, and he's an old man now. So, I said, that guy is psychic. That guy, seriously, there's no
Yeah.
way he's not psychic. But I'm fascinated by, number one, this martial connection and the warrior and so on. And then that being such a problem for us, most of us, us people. And then, of course, this shamanic death. Like, I am dead. I have died already. There's the world means something different for me. I don't know if that's really a question, but I don't know. Can you make anything of it?
I mean,
Sorry about that.
yeah, no. I mean, the thing that sort of like, you know, jumped into my brain when you were kind of talking was kind of the relation of some of these things to like being in like a flow state where, you're performing at a really high level, but you're not really trying. And there's not an effort involved. It's just a natural process. And so it makes sense that that kind of a thing would happen if you're in a really stressful situation like a war zone. But you're trained for this, right? And so it's like your body knows what to do. And if you think too much, you're going to get yourself in trouble. It's like you have to just do. And again, it seems like that is a really key element of this. Like, how do we get into this flow state where it's just happening? Uh, you know, and you even see that in some of the brain research, right? Like so for example, one of the famous studies that was done a few years back with a bunch of Tibetan monks,
Hmm.
and they hooked up their brains and had them do a compassion meditation. And what they found was this huge increase of gamma brainwaves, which is the fastest brainwave that we study. And so when it first came out, it was kind of like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Like, these are monks. Shouldn't they have like really slow brainwaves?
Hmm.
Uh, but they didn't. They had these really fast brainwave patterns. And, for me, it actually made some sense when I started thinking about it, because one of the things that's interesting about gamma is that it is associated with this flow state of sort of, integrating high level information, but with no effort. And so to me, it was like, well, of course, right? If you're a Tibetan monk and you meditate all day long, when you enter a compassion state, you're probably able to do that at a really high level, but you don't have to try anymore. You just do it. You just drop into that space.
Hmm.
And so, it's interesting because it seems like that's the trick, and so, I'm not saying that efforting and practice isn't important, because maybe that's an initial stage, right? Like, because you got to have some skill, you have to learn some things, but then get to a point where, it just happens naturally.
Yeah.
Maybe like a good musician, same thing, right? Like when you start playing a musical instrument, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of practice. But then when you get good, you're not thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're just playing. And those are usually the ones that are the most amazing, right? Because it's just happening. There's no analysis involved.
Hmm. I think we could talk about this for a long time. Okay, but bearing in mind, I do know you've got I plan to talk to you for 2 hours. So, but uh, we can come
we,
back. We can
yeah,
get.
we can do a part two.
But one thing that really interested me, and kind of like a feedback if it's useful, the book, the psychotronic things. So where you're able to get something, these audiovisual light sensors on the eyes and put things on the head doing magnetic resonances. I listen to those chapters. I'm riding my motorbike and I'm listening to my Audible and I'm like, what were the names of those devices? And I wanted a PDF. A lot of audiobooks have a PDF, and I'm like, I wonder where am I going to find them? Because the names are a little bit long to note. So, but that now, my segue here is to come to um, your psychic experience and the with this psychotronic, which is something the Russians were very into, I think. Um, so I don't know. I mean, it feels like a really big subject, and I want to try it. I really want to try this psychotronic stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So as kind of an introduction to that topic, uh, after I measured quite a number of psychics and mediums and healers and things when they were doing their work, started to notice certain patterns that, I'm not going to say were 100% consistent because there was a lot of individual variability, but there were certain parts of the brain in particular that showed up acting funny over and over and over and over and over again. And so, for me, what I started thinking about was like, well, gosh, if those parts of the brain are important in this work, and actually, I think the way that they're important is by learning to get them out of the way most of the time. There's certain parts of the brain that I think inhibit our ability to connect. We have all these filter mechanisms in the brain that prevent us getting information that's not biologically useful, right? Or that the brain doesn't interpret that way. And so, looking at these parts of the brain that need to get shut down or moved aside temporarily so that we can access these abilities. So for me, it became this question of like, well, gosh, if we kind of know the brain regions, could we reverse engineer this so that we could use technology as a way to kind of nudge the brain into the desired direction? So maybe that could facilitate some of these skills for people by kind of helping the brain get out of the way.
right.
And we've been working with a few different technologies. One of them is the audio-visual entrainment that you started to describe, which are basically glasses that have lights built into the eye set, and then you put headphones on, and the lights flicker at certain frequencies, at certain rates, and there's a consistent tone in the headphones. And essentially, what that's doing is pulling the brain to the same frequency. So if you're flashing lights 10 times a second, the brain will start producing more 10 cycle per second brain waves, which in this case is alpha. So if we're trying to move the brain into a particular frequency, we can use things like audiovisual entrainment as a way to facilitate that. Or, another sort of related technology is using low power pulsed electromagnetic frequencies.
Yep.
So, and, it's a mouthful, but basically it's using very low power electromagnetic pulses on the skull.
Yep.
That, they'll penetrate the skull enough, and you can use it the same way. So if you're pulsing, we'll use the same example. If you're pulsing on and off 10 times a second, well, then the brain starts to match that. It starts to match that frequency pattern.
Yes.
So it's kind of the same idea. It's just using a different technology.
Right.
There's some other tech as well, but those are the two that we've used the most. And, what we're finding is that, at least in some individuals, it does seem to make a difference. In fact, I just had somebody in my office yesterday who is a professional psychic medium. And, he came in to do a brain map and see what was going on in his brain. And so as part of our experiment, I said, hey, how about if we put one of these things on your head and you do a reading with, with this running.
Right.
And it was interesting because he'd already done one reading. And so then when we did the second one we were using the pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, and we put it at 3 hertz, which is a very slow frequency. So we were trying to shut down those parts of the brain. And we put one of them on the left frontal lobe, and then we put the other two on the right parietal lobe, so the God spot. And so he's given this reading to somebody else. It wasn't to me. And, he started off really strong, a lot of really evidential information, very specific names and dates and all kinds of things like this that were spot on, really good. And he was about halfway through, and he kind of lost it. He kind of lost his flow. And I was sitting there and I was like, oh gosh, I hope our technology didn't kind of mess him up, right? It didn't kind of like knock him off track. And after a few minutes, he kind of got back in a rhythm, and he was, on a roll. And so after the session, I said, we were processing it. And he said that the technology, like, it opened him up so much once it kind of kicked in, that like, he kind of like lost track of where he was for a minute. Like, he had a hard time kind of pulling it back down because it like, it opened up so much. And so, but he was able to do it, right? He was able to work with it and then kind of channel it back down. And so I thought that was interesting, because that's kind of the feedback that we get from people, is that it seems to open things up more quickly. And so we tend to use it with not like professionals, right? Because they can already do it, but with people who are trying to develop their abilities.
Right.
And maybe it's more inconsistent, or they feel like maybe they're not particularly good at that, at doing that. So it's kind of like giving them a jump start, to kind of get the process going.
Yeah, I mean, you got me. I mean, I'm hooked. I'm fascinated in that. I'm particularly interested. So you've had some personal experiences, I'm assuming, like you've had personal experiences apart from the Qigong, where you've gone, there's no way I could have known this, and it's come through in a rather unusual way. Has that been facilitated for you by the psychotronic equipment, or?
Yeah, it's interesting, my own process, because obviously I'm interested in this stuff and would like to develop my own abilities. And so, of course, I experiment on myself. And, one of the, again, it's just maybe a quirk of my personality, is that I've got this habit of, I'll get interested in something in particular. So let's say psychokinesis.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I want to see if I can do this. And I'll work at it, and I'll practice, and I'll spend time on it. And I'll do it until I get to a point that I've convinced myself that I can do it. And then once I get to that point, I'm kind of like done. It's kind of like, okay. And then I kind of like move on. But so I have had experiences both with, psychic information as well as psychokinesis, that, are pretty compelling, right? Like moving like a pinwheel, right? Which is a real common psychokinesis type of a test. Make a little aluminum square and stick it on a nail or something, and try to get it to move by mental attention. And, for me, I was able to do that pretty quickly. But if you're doing it in a way where it's not covered, where it's just in the open air, it's hard to trust yourself, right? Because it's like, well, maybe there was a little wind current or something that moved it. And, but, I got to a point where I could put a cover over it, and it was much more inconsistent. But, once I put a cover over it, I could still get it to move. So there was no air current. There was nothing that could have influenced it, and you're making this thing spin. And so,
Interesting.
Yeah,
Have
stuff
you done
like
it
that.
from a distance? I'm curious, because a lot of the energy work I do personally is over a distance, like thousands of kilometers. Yeah. So have you tried the psychokinesis over a distance?
I personally haven't, but I know people who have done some of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Caroline Corey. if you're familiar with
Yeah, I
her.
invited her. Her PR guy said, yeah, she's coming, and she didn't want to come. So whatever, maybe she'll come later. But I thought Caroline Corrie, she's really impressive. I'm a fan. Yeah.
Yeah, and in one of her documentaries, forget what it was called,
Superhuman.
superhuman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she demonstrated one of those experiments, right, where she was in whatever city she was in, and the experiment was set up in another city,
Yeah.
and she was moving something that was under a vacuum sealed glass container. So you see examples like that. I've not tried that personally myself. I just haven't had a setup to do that.
What I'm curious about is essentially healing is, well, we don't know, okay? But let's say healing is psychokinetic. Yeah. We're making something on some level physically change. Yeah. So, and we're often doing it over a distance. And then you've got this like silly, like not silly at all, but you've got this silly pinwheel with an aluminium square on it, and it's covered by a bell, and suddenly you go, oh, well, that's different. Yeah. Or how do I deal with this? Because it's kind of like a fake problem. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
for sure.
somebody comes to me with cancer, that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody's, got a complicated relationship with a parent or boyfriend or whatever. That's a problem. Yeah. But
yeah,
then a pinwheel, and it's like one of my teachers, a guy called Lynn Buchanan. He's a remote viewer. He said his teacher, Ingo, one of his teachers, I mean, he learned a bit with Ingo. He said, you can't bribe a dog with a dollar. Yeah. Because your mind, it needs its dopamine shot at the end. Yeah. And it doesn't understand a, a wheel spinning. It just doesn't really understand that. But I don't know if that's what it's about. But so you used your. I'm sorry, I'm waffling. I'm not doing my best interview today, but I am loving what you're saying. And maybe it is, the viewers will let me know. Um,
you're right.
so did you have like, um, kind of like, well, number one is I've gone in my mind, I've gone, wait a minute. So we're saying the brain is maybe responsible for our psychic functioning, which of course is a hypothesis. Yeah. Um, that's a hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that is it depending on which part of brain we're activating and how we're directing our mental, our psychic functioning, our psychic, you know, force. Um, so that's one thing because um, my my teacher would always talk about the qi and then entering into a jingjia, which is a world. So you literally had to change your world. You had to enter into a world where there was energy, for example. And in an energy world, things that you say, they wouldn't necessarily make sense to anybody outside that world. It's like a classic Plato's cave,
yeah,
where you get to see that the shadows cast on the wall by the fire, yeah, isn't really, the shadows are not reality. So you say like you leave the cave, you're in somewhere else. When you start to talk to other people, they think you're crazy because you're talking about a different reality. And then you go back and yeah, and then it doesn't make sense to you necessarily. Yeah. Um, but I mean, that could also be a brain state, of course.
yeah. And just to clarify, my own thinking at this moment about what's going on with the brain is, I think to a large degree, the brain in relation to psychic abilities is that the brain is actually getting in the way, that it's actually inhibiting those natural abilities. And we have some evidence for this in various research, including some of the stuff that we've done. And so, in some cases, it looks like parts of the brain have to shut down or shift function so that they're not doing their normal job, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So, like, especially the ones I was just talking about, that right parietal lobe, that God spot, also the left prefrontal. We have pretty good evidence that both of those need to get out of the way, that they're both kind of creating an artificial boundary or limitation that prevents us from things. And if we can get those to quiet down, people do better. They do better on psychic tasks. Now, at the same time, certain other parts of the brain also seem to become activated. And especially the right frontal lobe and the occipital lobe in the back. But my feeling at the moment is that it's not necessarily that the brain is causing the psychic ability, but what's happening is we're seeing sort of the after effect, so to speak. So like the right frontal lobe is involved in attention. Well, it makes sense that you may have to shift your attention in a different way when you're doing some sort of psychic task. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the right frontal lobe is responsible for psychic abilities, but it's responsible for shifting your attention, right? Or like the occipital lobe is responsible for visual processing.
Yep.
Well, if you're getting psychic information and it's visual, your brain has to process that somehow.
Yep.
And so it's using the occipital lobe to process it. But the occipital lobe isn't causing the psychic ability. It's just how it's kind of like, turning it into useful information that we can do something with. I don't know if this is making sense, kind of what
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
kind of how I'm
Yeah,
breaking
it
this
makes
down.
sense. It makes sense. It makes sense to me. I mean, it's almost like you could say the brain is a information filtering system. Yeah. So
Yeah.
some of the things it lets through at a certain consciousness level. So when I'm getting insight, so when I'm doing my energy work, I don't have to be correct, but I need to be valid. I need to get valid information, which is, I think it's such a cop out because I can say, well, I see tonight I was doing energy work on TikTok and a thousand people turned up, and I had one lady. I said, I see sea urchins. I don't know why that means, but I see sea urchins. She's in Japan. It could be related, but she felt better. Yeah, was part of the process. So to activate my well, I call it like a lightning effect. If I want to get something which is out there, maybe it's plus. It's like it's a charged information which I don't have. So I'm minus. To get plus and minus, I need to go to zero. I need to make a connection. Now I have a perfect magnetic field. And in fact, that's one of the things I want to tell you. I love you said this, you channeled this about the um, positive, negative, and neutral. I think,
Hmm.
yeah. And that I've been writing about this for like 5 years, exactly positive, negative, neutral. And there's this dynamic that goes on. And you literally, by going and saying, I know nothing in this moment, and I'm asking a question. So I'm putting it out there. What is causing this person to be sick? And then you go, I know, but I don't know anything now. And then it just, boom, comes through like lightning, I call it. It's a download. Um, and essentially, you could say the universe is a supercomputer if you're going to, I mean, literally a qubit, like plus one, minus one, zero is that three option. Um, I've written a lot about that, but anyway, um, you're you're making that connection. If you can get your brain to shut up, yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and you put out the intention. So you've got to be lucid enough to be able to put out the intention, and then you can start to get information. But how do you interpret the information? I get sea urchins and I get silly things, which I don't think would be useful as a psychic medium. I mean, I was in Hong Kong and I was staying in this apartment and I got this impression. I was standing at the apartment. I said, everyone is going to leave the apartment. I don't know why, but I see everybody leaving. And the person I was renting from wasn't paying the owner of the building, and all of the apartments hadn't been paid for months, and they were just pocketing our rent. and everybody had to leave. And it was like, that was clear information. I saw everybody leaving, but it didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Later, I get, yeah, I always say the information you get is never wrong. It's just, it's often not right either. Yeah, but it's not actually wrong. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
No, that's interesting. And, it makes me think about, there's several different mediums that I do work with. And, one of them, Laura Lynn Jackson, she's a pretty well-known
She's
psychic medium.
famous, yeah.
Yeah. And, we do workshops together and things like that. And, um, so I've seen her do a lot of gallery readings, right? Where you've got a big audience and she's doing, she's kind of going around like, oh, I'm getting something over here. And she goes and does a little reading over here and then goes over here. And not just Laura, I've seen lots of other mediums do that kind of work. And, I'm always kind of in an observer role, right? Because I'm not really in the audience. So I'm just kind of watching. And what always strikes me is really interesting is, you can see them just being on fire, right? Like they're just getting really good information. And then inevitably at some point they kind of like I was just describing with this session yesterday, kind of get off track a little bit, right? And it's kind of like it's not really connecting to the person. They're kind of going like, no, 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 that's not really it, you know. And then somehow they get back on.
Mm.
And the more that I've thought about this and watched it, this is my theory, but my theory is that what happens is when they're getting accurate information, they're not analyzing it. They're not trying to make sense out of it. They're just saying whatever it is. I'm getting sea urchins. You just say it and you don't try to make any sense out of it. But then at some point, that left part of your brain wants to kick in and go, oh, okay, wait a minute, I'm getting sea urchins. Oh, well, they're from Japan. Maybe, gee, I wonder if they live by the ocean or they've, like whatever. Like some
Yeah.
part of your brain wants to start making a story about it. And then that's when you lose it, right? Like, okay, now you're not actually connected anymore because you're trying to outthink it. You're trying to outthink the information.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the trick, right? Like for mediums who are really good, somehow they're really able to stay in that flow and just let the information come through and they don't edit themselves. I think that's also why so many mediums talk so fast when they're doing a reading. They'll say the information is coming in really rapid fire and they're just trying to relate it. But I also have a theory that helps them stay out of their head. Like if they just keep talking, just relaying everything that comes through,
Right.
it sort of like prevents you from getting too much in your head and thinking about it.
I think I might have spent most of my life channeling because I generally don't think about the next word that's coming out of my mouth. I really wish I'd learned that at some point. Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. That fits along with the concept of what they call an analytical overlay from the remote
Yeah,
viewing point of view. Like it's
yeah,
like you've gone, I get rubbery, I get red, it's a balloon. And it's like, yeah, but it could be a ball, it could be like um a little knob on the door, door stop. It could be so many things, but
yeah,
you've gone it. Okay, I've got two things. I know what it is, and it's something like the Dunning-Kruger effect in a way, because I always say, like, I've worked in healthcare for a number of years, and like when you're doing a treatment on somebody, it's easy to think when they tell you the symptoms that you know what they've got, and you only know when you put your hands on them, you do a full exam, and you've got more points. You've got, okay, I'm never going to know 100% because like 99% after doing all points, you've got a picture, and it gets better because you're right. Yeah, your picture was right. But if they don't get better, then it's something else is going on. But
yeah.
yeah, fascinating. And so what's next for you? I mean, like, it sounds fascinating. I mean, what are you actually doing? Are you making money from like being psychic or testing psychics or? I mean, I love your
Um,
book, but I'm thinking, how does this guy make any money? It's just like, come, I'll put these electrodes on your head. I'll measure your brain
yeah,
waves.
yeah, it's a good question. How do I make any money? To be honest, the vast majority of the psychic research that I do doesn't make any money at all. There's very little grants out there. Most of it I just do on my own and just at my own expense. I do, teach classes and workshops and things like that. And so, of course, there's a little bit of income from generated from that. But most of how I make a living is actually through a different branch of what I do, sort of the neuro meditation work. So, combining technology with meditation for mental health. And, I've been doing that for quite a while. And so that's kind of like my other part of my life, right? And so, that pays the bills. And then with whatever time I have left, I do this other work as, mostly a passion project. Um, who knows, one of these days, maybe I can figure out a way to uh, make a living off of just doing work with psychic explorations, but we'll see.
I, you know, I I've got the feeling it's going to be growing because with the event of AI, for knowledge, we're going to rely on AI. But for intuition, which is something else, it's going to be obvious that intuition is something else. Like that, let's say Steve Jobs, he had these ideas. They were coming from, I know this is going to work. I know I can do this. That it's not just knowledge is half of um, the rent, as they said. So
Yeah, no, it's a good point. In fact, I was just talking to a different psychic medium friend of mine yesterday, and she'll very often like give me a little mini reading, right? Like I walk in, she owns a coffee shop down the street, and so I'm there, every day just about, and so I'll go in and she'll be like, oh hey, I was getting this stuff for you this morning or whatever, and yesterday she was kind of talking to me about uh, this idea of really, I mean, I guess it'd be almost sort of like going with the flow, but also trusting the process and kind of listening for when opportunities come up, do they really resonate? Right. And like, if it's not an automatic yes, then it's like, maybe it's a no. Right. Like, so maybe don't say yes to everything that comes around just because you feel like you should or because whatever. So, it was an interesting thing for me to kind of think about, in relation to what we're discussing, right? Because I can get caught in this process of kind of like, okay, I got to make a living. So things will come up that it's like, okay, that can pay the bills, but it's not really something I'm interested in or something I'm passionate about. Um, but I do it anyway. Um, and, sometimes I'll regret that, down the road. And it's like, I wonder what would happen, right? If I just sort of created more space and so, okay, I'm not going to push the river. I'm just going to be open. If something isn't resonating, I'm not going to do it and sort of, allow other opportunities to sort of come in. I don't know. I'm just sort of, it was just an interesting conversation yesterday that reminded me of what you were talking about.
yeah, I mean, it seems to me. I mean, I think there is a number of factors in it, and we talked about this very briefly. But um, meditation, as far as and I think that there's a problem with meditation because there's a lot of culty things that can get around it. But essentially, meditation should be about knowing yourself, truly knowing yourself, and actually becoming a friend to yourself and totally being, you could say, totally grounded, totally like here and, really, really a strong person. And that's an ideal, that's the ideal, I say, fertile soil for psychic functioning. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know your thoughts. That's not me. That's a thought that's come from somewhere else, and then you start to develop the skill. Um, for example. So I could see them feeding into each other, but I can
For
see it.
sure.
So it's also, how can I say? I think we talked. I don't know what the right word. It could be a bit controversial to link them. Yeah, yeah, but now at least there's people that go like meditation is it's like an exercise for the brain. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't don't think too much about psychic. It happens naturally. Yeah, and well, I mean, forgive me if it's okay, but I mean, I think I wrote in my book the one I'm currently working on. Um, I I'm paraphrasing Jesus. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Yeah, I think it's in John. It's we have to go inside. That's where we
Yeah.
find the kingdom of heaven. Um, so yeah, I'm a bit wary of your time. Okay, because
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
I've
I know. I apologize that
got
I don't have more availability this morning.
well, it's okay. I mean, in a way, it's really helped us really focus. I would love to. Who should reach out to you? Psychics who want to know more about their skills, or people who want to become psychic? Can reach out to you?
Both. Because because obviously, I still am doing research with people who have psychic mediumship healing abilities. So love to hear from those folks and see if there's a way to collaborate or work together. And then yeah, people who are interested in developing their abilities. We've been developing more and more classes and workshops, usually using the technology as a tool to kind of help people understand how to use the tech and how to step more into their natural abilities. So yeah, that both of those would actually be great people to send along.
Okay, so that's the other thing. You're selling the tech. You're selling this psychotronic equipment as well. So is that I just feel a bit lost. I mean, I've gone on the shop and I've seen like a lot of things. I don't really know where to start. So, but we could start. I mean, I probably got to buy a hard copy of your book. That's probably just like, okay, I just got to buy a hard copy of the book and I'll look it up, but which is fine. But we can go on the shop and we can find a load of psychotronic things that we could try.
Yeah, yeah, we have a few things in the shop, the things that we use a lot. So they're not products that we made or developed. We just work with another company that already has the equipment and things that we've tested and we really like and seem to work well for us. So we do have a few of those in our shop. And also, you've mentioned a couple times that some of the information around this, it's a little hard to digest if you're not used to it. And actually, if you go to the Psychic Mind Science website, we have two websites. But if
Right.
you go to the Psychic Mind Science website, you can download a free PDF. I don't know, it's like 25 pages or something like that.
Okay.
And literally, like I just break down, here's how brainwaves work. Here's the brain regions that seem to be involved. Here's the technology that we were
Brilliant.
talking about. So
Okay.
it just kind of breaks it all down and then gives some resources. So that might be a good thing for people to check out.
Links below, guys. I will put a link below. I'm putting links to the website below. I'm putting links to this PDF below. Jeff is your guy to contact if you want to know more about what's going on with your brain when you're doing something psychic, or if you're not doing something psychic and you want to know what's going on with your brain. That's fantastic. I've overrun a little bit, Jeff. I'm so sorry, but it's
Okay.
been fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll put this up, you know, I'll put this up on YouTube and I'll send you the description. You just need to give me the nod that it's okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. It's
Yeah,
been,
no, it's great talking to you. And yeah, let's do it again. And thanks for everything. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
I'm sure we will.